You know that moment when someone does something that cuts you deep, I mean really deep, and then just carries on like nothing ever happened. They walk past you like they didn't betray your trust, like they didn't say those words that tore your soul open, like they weren't the reason behind your silent tears at night. And you sit there wondering, how could they? You question yourself, you rewind every conversation, you overanalyze your every move, you blame yourself. But let me tell you something today, it was never your fault. When someone hurts you and then acts like nothing happened, it leaves you in a strange and painful emotional limbo, questioning not just what they did, but why they seem so unaffected by it, why they can look you in the eye without flinching, speak to you as if everything's normal or worse, walk away completely and pretend you never existed. And the most confusing part of all this is how calmly they behave while you're still stuck in the storm they created. But what we often fail to understand is that this kind of detachment isn't innocence, it's a defense mechanism, a psychological shield they use to protect themselves from having to confront the truth of their actions. Because for them to admit they hurt you would mean admitting that they are capable of causing harm, and that's something their ego simply won't allow. So instead of apologizing or acknowledging your pain, they pretend it never happened. They bury it under silence, under fake smiles, under distractions, all in an effort to keep their carefully crafted image of themselves intact. And that image might be one of a good person, a kind soul, someone who never means to do harm. So when their actions contradict that narrative rather than correct the behavior, they rewrite the story in their minds, and in their rewritten version, you were too sensitive, you misunderstood, or worse, you deserved it, and while you're left holding the emotional weight of the damage, they've already moved on because facing it would mean facing parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. This emotional detachment is often rooted in patterns they learned early in life. Maybe they were never taught to own their mistakes. Maybe apologies were seen as signs of weakness. Maybe in their home, emotional connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was something to be punished or shamed. So they learned how to survive by disconnecting, and now, as adults, they apply the same logic to their relationships. So when they hurt you, instead of meeting your pain with empathy, they shut down, they withdraw, or they deny anything ever happened. And because you're emotionally available and self-aware, you notice the rupture, you feel the tension, you long for resolution, but they've conditioned themselves to ignore it, to walk away from discomfort rather than toward it. And the most dangerous part is that this emotional avoidance often masks itself as calmness. They appear unbothered, collected, even emotionally intelligent on the surface. But what you're seeing isn't peace, it's avoidance, and avoidance isn't healing, it's a delay of truth. And the hardest pill to swallow is realizing that they may not see anything wrong with how they handled things, because for them, admitting fault would mean peeling back layers of denial. It would mean shattering the version of themselves that they've convinced everyone and even themselves is the real one, and that's terrifying for someone who hasn't built the emotional tools to handle self-reflection. So it becomes easier to paint you as overdramatic, as the problem, as the one who just can't let things go, even though the reality is you just want honesty, clarity, closure. And while you're stuck in loops of self-doubt, wondering what you did wrong, they are already narrating a version of events that absolves them of everything. And that's what emotional detachment really is. It's not a sign of strength or maturity. It's avoidance. It's a refusal to take emotional responsibility. It's a survival mechanism that may protect their ego but destroys relationships in the process. And once you see that clearly, once you understand that their ability to move on quickly is not proof that they're right or justified, but a reflection of their emotional limitations, you begin to let go of the idea that their calmness equals correctness, and you start reclaiming your truth, your feelings, your version of what happened, and you stop expecting empathy from people who haven't yet developed it within themselves, because their emotional detachment has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their fear of facing themselves when someone hurts you and refuses to acknowledge it, refuses to apologize, and simply moves forward like nothing ever happened. It's easy to start questioning your own worth, to wonder if maybe you're asking for too much, if maybe your feelings were exaggerated or invalid. But the truth is their silence, their lack of remorse, their inability or unwillingness to say a simple "I'm sorry" has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own limitations, because not everyone is capable of emotional accountability. Not everyone is emotionally equipped to face the consequences of their actions, and instead of taking responsibility, they'd rather protect their pride, their ego, their comfort, so they pretend your pain doesn't exist, and in doing so, they send a dangerous message that your feelings don't matter, that the harm they caused isn't real, that you're not worth the effort of a conversation, and that can be crushing, especially if you're someone who shows up honestly, who communicates openly, who is willing to own your flaws and offer apologies when necessary, and yet the same courtesy isn't returned to you, and it creates an imbalance where you're carrying not just your pain but the burden of their silence, and over time, that silence begins to echo louder than the offense itself. But here's the truth that often gets lost in all that overthinking and self-doubt: their lack of apology is not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their capacity or lack thereof, because apologizing, truly apologizing, requires self-awareness, humility, courage, and a willingness to look inward, and not everyone has cultivated those traits. Some people would rather lose you than confront their behavior. Some people are so used to operating from a place of emotional detachment that they don't even register the damage they leave behind. And when you ask for a simple acknowledgement, they perceive it as an attack, because any request for accountability threatens the identity they've built for themselves, one where they're never the bad guy, one where they're always misunderstood or mistreated, and in their world, your pain doesn't fit into the narrative, so they erase it. And when that happens, when they disregard your experience, you start internalizing that absence of validation, and it begins to feel like you're the one who's broken. But the reality is, you're not broken. You're just in the presence of someone who refuses to see the truth, and what's more painful is that deep down, part of you believes that if they could just say sorry just once, it would ease the weight on your chest. It would help you begin to heal, because that one word, that small gesture, would mean that your pain was real, that it mattered, that you mattered. But when that apology never comes, it forces you into an emotional limbo where you're stuck waiting for a form of closure that they are either unwilling or unable to give. And in that space, you have a choice to make: to keep waiting, hoping they'll change, or to accept that some people are emotionally unavailable in ways that words can't fix, because their refusal to apologize isn't about whether you deserve it. It's about their fear of vulnerability, their fear of losing control, their fear of admitting that they're not as good or innocent or kind as they want to believe. And when you realize this, you begin to understand that forgiveness is not about letting them off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the hold their silence has on you. So no, their silence isn't proof that you were wrong to feel what you felt. And their lack of apology doesn't mean you imagined the pain. It simply means they don't have the emotional depth or courage to meet you where you are. And that's not your fault. It never was, and it never will be. So stop looking for worth in people who lack the basic emotional maturity to recognize your humanity, because the truth is, people who can't say sorry are not strong, they're afraid. And their fear has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their refusal to grow. And the most powerful thing you can do is stop seeking wholeness in someone who is still shattered inside. There comes a point when you realize that the apology you're waiting for may never come, the explanation you deserve may never be given, and the closure you need might not arrive in the way you hoped it would. And that realization is painful, because we are conditioned to believe that healing requires a full circle, that in order to move on, we need the other person to admit what they did, to say the words that validate our experience. But the hard truth is, some people will never give you that, not because you don't deserve it, but because they can't offer what they don't possess. And the longer you wait for their accountability, the longer you delay your own healing, because you're placing your peace in the hands of someone who couldn't even protect your trust in the first place. And it's a trap, this need for closure from the very person who broke you, because it keeps you tethered to the moment they hurt you. It holds you in a place where their power still defines your emotional state. And the truth is, closure is not something they give you, it's something you create when you decide you've waited long enough, when you decide that you will no longer let someone's silence be the reason you suffer. You don't need their apology to heal, you don't need their understanding to move forward, and you don't need their version of the story to validate your truth, because you were there, you felt it, and that alone is enough. But what often happens is we convince ourselves that if we could just have one more conversation, one more message, one more acknowledgement, everything would make sense, everything would fall into place. But what if the lesson is in the absence? What if the growth is in realizing that peace isn't dependent on another person's remorse? What if you could stop replaying the hurt and start reclaiming your power, not by ignoring what happened, but by choosing to stop letting it rule you? Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live above the weight of what they did. It's about choosing yourself in a situation where they didn't, and it's not easy. Because our hearts crave resolution, our minds want answers, and our emotions seek balance. But some people are incapable of giving that to you, not because your pain isn't real, but because their emotional vocabulary is limited, and their understanding of their own behavior is shallow. So they avoid, they deflect, they run, and they hope time will erase what they refuse to face. But for you, the one carrying the wound, the clock doesn't stop, the ache doesn't disappear just because they moved on, and this is where you must choose to take your power back, by no longer depending on their recognition for your relief, by recognizing that your healing is yours, and it begins the moment you stop asking them to show up, and start showing up for yourself. Closure is not a door they open for you, it's a decision you make to stop standing at a locked one, hoping they'll eventually come back with a key. And yes, that means grieving what could have been, mourning the apology that never came, and letting go of the version of them you wished was real. But once you do that, once you accept that their silence is their answer, you set yourself free, and in that freedom, you discover that healing doesn't need permission, it doesn't need validation, and it certainly doesn't need them. It only needs you ready, willing, and courageous enough to write your next chapter without waiting for someone who didn't have the decency to finish the last one with honesty or care. And that choice, that inner decision to move forward with or without their closure, is the beginning of your emotional liberation. The pain they caused was real. The confusion it brought into your life was real. And the moments you spent lying awake at night, trying to understand how someone could hurt you like that, and then act as if nothing ever happened, were real too. And it's important to remind yourself of that, because when someone dismisses your experience, when they carry on with their life without offering an apology or explanation, it can leave you feeling like maybe you imagined the whole thing. Like maybe you're too sensitive or dramatic, but no, you're not to anything. What you are is someone who felt deeply, who trusted genuinely, who showed up with love, and when that love was violated, when that trust was broken, the wound it left behind had depth, but even deeper than the pain what it began to teach you, because sometimes what hurts the most is what wakes you up, what opens your eyes, what pulls you out of denial and forces you to see the truth that you might have overlooked while trying to hold everything together. And maybe the truth was that they were never emotionally present to begin with, or maybe you excused red flags because you believed in their potential, or maybe you thought that if you just loved harder, gave more, proved your loyalty again and again, they'd finally meet you with the same effort. But the moment they hurt you and acted like nothing happened, everything shifted because that moment didn't just break your heart. It revealed everything they were unwilling to be and everything you were no longer willing to tolerate. And yes, it hurts. It hurts to see someone you cared about choose avoidance over honesty, to watch them walk away with no remorse while you're left with 1,000 unanswered questions. But there's a power that begins to rise within you the moment you stop trying to make sense of their actions and start paying attention to your own growth, because as much as their silence broke something in you, it also awakened something, a deeper understanding of yourself, a sharper awareness of what you deserve, and a stronger boundary that you didn't know you were capable of setting. And that's what pain does when you let it guide you instead of destroy you. It shows you what needs to be healed, what needs to be released, and what needs to be reclaimed. And even though you never asked for this lesson, even though you never wanted this kind of awakening, now that it's here, it's shaping you into someone more resilient, someone more discerning, someone more in tune with who they are and what they truly need. You're learning that not every person who enters your life is meant to stay, and not every connection is built on love, even when it feels that way at first. And sometimes the people who seem the most charming, the most warm, the most accepting at the beginning are the very ones who leave the deepest scars when their true colors show. But scars are not just reminders of what happened. They are proof that you've survived, that you've healed in places you were once bleeding. And while you may carry the memory of what they did, you are no longer carrying the burden of it, because what once broke you now builds you, what once silenced you now strengthens your voice, and what once confused you now brings clarity. So even if they pretend it never happened, even if they never acknowledge the pain they caused, it happened, you felt it, you lived through it, and now you are growing because of it. And the beautiful, undeniable truth is that you don't need them to recognize your pain for you to rise from it, because your healing, your evolution, your transformation is not dependent on their awareness. It's a result of your courage to feel, to confront, and to rebuild. And that journey, though born in pain, is taking you somewhere far more powerful than anything they could have offered you, because now you are no longer seeking love from those who don't know how to give it. You are giving that love to yourself, and that is the beginning of everything you've been waiting for. They may act like nothing happened, but something did happen. It shaped you, it woke you up, it taught you to pay attention to the red flags you once excused. And that, my dear, is growth. Painful, messy, inconvenient growth, but growth nonetheless. So rise from it, not for them, for you. Because when they hurt you and acted like nothing happened, they underestimated your power. And now you get to show them and yourself just how powerful you truly are.